It's been a wonderful season for Iowa State men's basketball, and since the season ended a few weeks ago, I think it's time we talk about the season as a whole. If you're familiar with some of the videos that I do on the podcast, I have made one video talking about how it's time we start having a serious talk about Iowa State basketball. And then I did another video where I mentioned that Iowa State had the potential to be Final Four contenders. And now today's video. Let's just talk about the season as a whole. And can we call this season, and for better lack of words, a failure for this men's team? As you all know, Iowa State is one of 14 schools in the Big 12 conference. We had 10 schools last year. Four new schools came in this year, bringing the total to 14. Two schools, Oklahoma and Texas, are leaving the Big 12 conference after this year, I believe, to go to the SEC. So that will bring it back down to 12. But there will be three or four other teams joining the conference too. So we'll add more schools to the 12 that we'll be left with at summer, I believe. Iowa State was predicted to finish seventh in the preseason polls in Big 12 play. Now, they weren't at the very top of the standings. That title belongs to teams like Kansas, Houston, Baylor, etc. But they also weren't predicted to be at the very bottom of the list either, unlike some other teams. They finished right into the middle, which is where I think most fans and just casual viewers of college basketball who has seen and watched this team in the past would accurately place them. So it doesn't seem like a far stretch to say that this season people came in with some doubts and some uncertainty. Last season, the team went on a whole roller coaster of a ride. They started off strong, and then they kind of lost a little bit of touch in non conference play. And then once they got to conference play, you saw them being very inconsistent, going from winning at home to winning on the road, then to losing home games, finding ways to win, and then losing. It was just up and down and up and down. They never found a way to be truly consistent with each other. And obviously, we know some stuff that happened behind the scenes with a basketball player, too, that kind of divided up the team bonding stuff. Iowa State last year made it to the NCAA tournament with less than 21 wins. Now, people have the expectation that every team must have at least 21 wins to make it to the NCAA tournament. And more oftentimes than not, that is true. If a team gets to 21 wins and they're playing in a good conference, they should, for better lack of words again, most likely be automatically qualified to make it into the NCAA tournament. That is not necessarily true. There have been teams with 21 wins who miss out on the NCAA tournament because their resume isn't strong enough. What a selection committee is looking for when they are thinking of which teams to put and which teams to select into the NCAA tournament is they are looking at strength of schedule in non-conference play. They are looking at strength of schedule in conference play, and they are looking again at win and loss records. So a team could have a very strong non-conference schedule and win a handful of those games if you're playing ranked teams. But the conference that one team may be in might not be on the same level or have the same intensity and the same, adver- the same adversity or the same mental and toughness as some of these other Power 5 conferences have, such as the Big 12, the Big 10, the SEC, the ACC, the Mountain West, etc., and the Big East. So even though a team might have 21 wins and they're playing in what we can call a decent conference, that still doesn't mean that they're going to make it into the March Madness and the NCAA tournament. If you win your conference tournament, though, which conference tournaments for men typically happen between the first and second week of March, usually right before Selection Sunday. If a basketball team wins their conference championship, they automatically get a bid into the NCAA tournament. They're automatically a lot, which means that the selection committee can't really consider letting them in or not. They are already have that lock. And that's what happened with Iowa State this year. They beat Houston in the Big 12 championship, so they automatically qualify to make it into the NCAA tournament. Now, with some teams in the Big 12 had this reputation this season of being one of the toughest conferences in America. And we're going to touch pretty soon here why that kind of fell off the ladder during the first few games of the tournament this year. But Iowa State beat Houston, the number one team in the country at that time, to deserve their shot into the tournament. Now, up until the Big 12 tournament, Iowa State had a pretty easy non conference strength of schedule. They were playing teams who are not Power 5 teams who are not in Power 5 conferences, and they were winning by 20, 30, and 40 points. So it's not necessarily the team's fault that they were winning by so many, and they were playing schools with less of a power that were not Power 5, and they couldn't help that. But one of the main issues, if you can call that, or one of the main concerns for Iowa State fans was if Iowa State would get that final number one seed in the tournament. Three other teams were automatically going to get that number one seed. That was going to be Houston, UConn, and Purdue, the top three ranked teams in the nation at the time. And they had better overall records, and they also won more games than Iowa State did. That final number one seed, though, was up for debate. North Carolina, who was projected to be that last one seed, did lose their conference championship. Now, North Carolina losing and Iowa State winning meant that they kind of had the same overall record and were playing schools with the same, versatility and within the same kind of conference as them. Even though North Carolina lost, people were still thinking that they would get that final one seed. But there was also reason to debate why Iowa State should get that final one seed due to winning in the Big 12, winning the conference championship, and just looking at their schedule and their wins, what their resume presented to them. The reason Iowa State did not get that final one seed was their non-conference strength of schedule. Again, they were playing teams who were not Power 5 schools. They were playing teams who might have been very low Division 1, and North Carolina had the more impressive overall record, hence why they got that final one seed. What did cause some, concern and some eye raises was the fact that not only did Iowa State get a 2 seed, which is what they were projected to get, but they got the worst 2 seed of all. So they were considered the 8th ranked team. So it goes, you have your 4 1 seeds, which goes 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4. There was 3 other seeds ahead of Iowa State who were 5, 6, and 7, which meant that Iowa State was the worst 2 seed, which put them at number 8, and they were in a region with the number 1 overall seed, UConn. Was that fair? You can kind of debate that too, but again, that all circles back to what Iowa State's resume looked like. And even though they won a handful of conference games, even though they beat the number 1 team at the time, Houston, twice, and they picked up very impressive wins against Kansas, against TCU, against Texas Tech, all teams who had more than 18 plus wins in the Big 12. It all came back to non-conference strength of schedule. And that's something that I advise people to, really take a deeper dive in and realize is that even though your team can have go undefeated or can have 21 plus win seasons multiple times a year in a row, you also have to look at the teams that they are playing and what their schedule and if that schedule sticks out to you. If Iowa State was playing teams in the Big Ten, in the ACC, in the SEC, in non-conference play and picking up those wins, I do believe that we would have seen them at not only a higher two seed, but even potentially beating out North Carolina for that final one seed. And that can be said for any team. It's not just Iowa State. There's teams who have very hard non-conference strength of schedules, but then in their conference they kind of have an easier go at it. And it can always be reversed. And sometimes teams just get that even balance where you're playing hard teams in non-conference, you're playing hard teams in conference play, and you can either win or lose. So it's really up for 50-50. So Iowa State's non-conference schedule this year was a pretty easy ride. They only lost 2 games in non-conference play, and those 2 losses came at a neutral site, a neutral court, where they played in a basketball tournament over Thanksgiving break. Before the start of the Big 12 season started, they had their first road game at Oklahoma. And in that game, they did not look well. They did not look good. Players were missing shots that they should typically make, and the dynamic just felt off. We can put that on, having a few days of rest over the Christmas break, and we can also kind of boil that down to this was Iowa State's real first shot and first test on the road and against a good team such as Oklahoma. Iowa State's non-conference schedule had mostly all home games, which meant that they were playing at Hilton Coliseum and they were getting that Hilton crowd and the Hilton magic with them. They got the support from their home fans and their home base, kind of like what you would expect any team to have when they're playing at home. This was Iowa State's first true road test, seeing if you can go on the road and win, but also seeing if you can go on the road and beat and keep up with a good team. Oklahoma was ranked in the top 10 at the time when Iowa State went to see them in early January. They lost, but not by double digits. They did lose by single digits, but again, it was kind of a very shaky performance, which we can kind of maybe boil down to just either road nerves or just a little bit off with, shooting dynamics and having to get used to that feeling of playing on the road. After their loss against Oklahoma, their next game was at Hilton against the number 2 team at Houston. Houston was one of 2 teams left with an undefeated record going in. Remember, Iowa State had lost their 2 non-conference games, and they had just lost to Oklahoma, making them a 3-loss team. And people thought that Iowa State could beat Houston, not because of their strength and their physique and the guys who are like maybe built more muscular, more athletically. People thought Iowa State could beat Houston because this was Houston's first year in the Big 12 and they didn't know if Houston had played any real good teams, quote unquote, yet. And that proved also to kind of be true. Houston did give Iowa State a run for their money during that game, but Iowa State fought back. They were making their shots, they were defending well, they were grabbing rebounds, and they were doing everything in their power to keep up with Houston's style of game while also sticking to their game plan. And it ended up giving them that big win over Houston. And now let's flash forward a few months. This was back in January. Flash forward to the end of February. Iowa State started 1-1 in conference play, obviously losing on the road to Oklahoma and then picking up that massive home win against Houston. And in that span of a month and a half, this Iowa State team only seemed to get better. They went on the road at TCU and picked up a win there without their best player, point guard Tamin Lipsey, who had to miss that game due to a shoulder injury. Curtis Jones, Iowa State's sixth man, stepped into that starting role to fill in, and it was just like a light switch. And that, I think we can also bring that win on the road at TCU as the foundation and the base for why Iowa State was able to succeed so well moving forward in conference play. They proved to people that not only could they win on the road and win at TCU, which is a lot harder place to win than I think most people realize, but they also proved that they could win without their main guy and their main point guard in Taman. Iowa State did go on, though, to lose a few games here and there. They picked up a good home win against Kansas. They lost on the road to a Baylor team who was looking to extend their hot streak that they were on. And they lost on a buzzer beater that just barely went off of freshman Milan Momcilovic's fingers as time expired. Had he made that three before the buzzer went off, Iowa State would have been walking out of there with a big win at Waco. Iowa State did win road games. The road loss against Oklahoma, I think we can maybe brush aside. They went on the road. They beat TCU. They beat Cincinnati. They beat the Texas Longhorns. But aside from winning on the road, they also managed to go undefeated at home. The first time that's happened in Hilton Coliseum since the 2000-2001 men's team. Every game that they played at Hilton, they won. And you hear people reference Hilton Magic and the Hilton crowd. I highly recommend going to an Iowa State basketball game just to get that, feel that Hilton magic and that Hilton experience. It is truly unlike most college basketball stadiums, and it feels like the true college. It's just the true college experience, not only for students, but just for the fans. Iowa State men's team gave the fans something to be happy about, something to find joy in. You saw them getting super excited and supporting this team, a team that I think we can all agree on looked a lot better this year than they did last year. And the reason why that is because of the players that they brought in, and because I think that their coach made one drastic improvement that truly changed the course of Iowa State's game plan all season long. But let's talk about the players for a second. The team last year lost a few seniors and a few players to the transfer portal. There was some hype about the freshman at the time, Tamin Lipsey, who was a freshman point guard playing in his first year as a Cyclone. Tamin grew up in Ames. Both of his parents are professors at Iowa State, and everyone kind of expected him to commit to Iowa State and to play as a Cyclone. Now, there was the hype surrounding him. He looked outstanding in high school, and people believed that he would bring that talent and bring that physique over into Iowa State and Hilton and suiting up as a Cyclone. Tamin had a great freshman year for not only just a freshman player, but for a point guard. He could hit the shots that he needed to. He knew how to give the ball off to his teammates, and he was also pretty consistent in coming up with steals. But a lot of fans had their reasonable questioning if he would improve as a sophomore. He looked great as a freshman. He exceeded a lot of expectations from the fans and I think from the media. But there was also the question of how can he improve and will he improve? And this season, we did see that improvement. The work that he put into the offseason really showed onto the court this year. You saw him getting more rebounds. You saw him, attacking the ball. You saw him hitting threes. He had only made 5 3 pointers all of last year. He was not a great 3 point shooter, but he started taking more shots this year and he started hitting those shots. And once again, he came up with steals. He found his players to make those assists. He was everywhere. And again, he was really the core, the leader, and the commander in charge when he's on the court, a role that you typically assign to a point guard. Milan Momcilovic, the 6'9 freshman who came into this season, also was bringing in some outside doubt from non-fans and fans in general, just of what can he contribute to this team and how is he going to fare on an Iowa State team as a freshman. Milan, once again, was very consistent throughout most of the season. He did have a few little cold slumps here and there, but he was also a pretty accurate 3 point shooter. I know I talked about the slump a little bit, where it seemed like he really couldn't find his groove hitting threes, but once he's on, he is on. And it's really hard to stop him from making those threes, making those shots. And his last shot at Houston was ultimately the reason why Iowa State walked out of Hilton with a win. Trey King and Hassan Ward were two returners who were on the team last year, coming in and stepping in once again this year. And once again, if we talk about improvement, there was improvement. Trey King was arguably one of Iowa State's better players on the court. He might not have been their leading scorer. He might not have been, their most consistent shooter, but you saw him doing almost everything. He could score when he needed to, but he was also going in and grabbing rebounds. He was probably the most versatile player that I saw on Iowa State this season. Hassan Ward, too, came off of a foot injury during the first part of the season in non-conference play. He later got to play in conference play a few games in, but he just brought joy. Hassan, he brought the energy, but he was also, in a way, just like Trey King, finding ways to grab rebounds, find those assists, and just scoring when he needed to. Two of Iowa State's newcomers this season are definitely people who had a major contribution to Iowa State's overall success. One of those players is Keyshawn Gilbert. Keyshawn played for TJ Otzelberger at UNLV before TJ came to Iowa State. And then Keyshawn also transferred over here too. Keyshawn's role is just like Taman's, a point guard. And people from the UNLV community also were kind of speculating whether or not Keyshawn would fare in a Cyclone jersey, but also fare against teams in the Big 12. And what we saw from Keyshawn is exactly what this team needed. You saw how Keyshawn controlled the floor. Now, he might have been a little bit inconsistent and a little bit more, jittery with the ball handling at times. He was definitely more turnover prone than Lipsey was/is. But Keyshawn had the deep range. He could make threes. He could attack the rim. He could also grab the rebounds, assists, force teams to commit the turnovers. He could do it all. And Keyshawn was rarely deserving of that Big 12 championship honor of most valuable player, MVP. He had major success in the Big 12 tournament throughout their 3 games. He was scoring well over 13 points in that. He averaged a little over 13 points per game into the season, and he was super fun to watch. And I think that we will continue just like what we saw the improvement from Taman from his freshman year to his sophomore year. I think we'll see improvement in Keyshawn from his junior year to his senior year. But another transfer and a newcomer who came in this season who didn't really get the spotlight until that TCU game is Curtis Jones. Curtis Jones is not the most athletically and muscularly built. He's not like he doesn't have the size of a Trey King or a Robert Jones or even a Taman Lipsey. He has more of the build and the physique of a Keyshawn. Curtis was a major reason why Iowa State came out with big key wins in Hilton Coliseum. Curtis, again, just kind of like with Milan, did have go through a bit of a shooting slump, but when he's on, he is on. You saw Curtis shooting threes and making those threes. You saw him when Taman or Keyshawn was sitting out. You saw him controlling the ball and controlling the pace of the game. He could attack again. He could shoot. He was also a pretty decent defender. He wasn't really letting off of guys that much. He was sticking to his assigned player for the most part. And he just had that joy in his eyes where you could tell he was truly loving the game. And Curtis Jones was a big reason why Iowa State was able to keep up with Illinois for the most part in this year's Sweet 16. He came off of a massive performance, and quite frankly, it seemed like he was the only player who showed up for Iowa State in the Sweet 16. And now, another reason, aside from all the players and their contributions, every single player played a role in Iowa State's success this year. I didn't name all of them, but every player plays a role in a team setting, just like what you should expect of a team. Everyone contributes, whether that be big or small, but it's a team effort, it's team dynamics, and it's team chemistry that you can truly tell which teams care for each other, which teams, have friendships outside of the court, and which teams don't. And I think it's very blatantly obvious that Iowa State, their whole coaching staff, their whole team dynamics was just very strong and very, well oriented throughout the entire season. Now, the second main reason why Iowa State had the success that they did this year was, in fact, their coach, TJ Ottelberger. Ottelberger came in after the program fired Steve Prohm for his 2-22 overall record 3 years ago. He got fired, and then TJ stepped in. TJ's first year, he led Iowa State to the Sweet 16, where Iowa State qualified for the NCAA tournament with 19 wins. Remember, we talked about a team typically needs to get to 21 wins to be considered for the NCAA tournament. There are very few, very rare, but very special occasions where teams can make it into the tournament with less than 21 wins, but their resume has to be outstanding and has to be stronger than some of these other teams competing for a spot into the tournament. And Iowa State with 19 wins at that time, or maybe they did get to 21. I can't remember, but I know that they barely squeezed in, but they still went to the Sweet 16 in Ottelberger's first year. In his second year, which would have been last year, the team made it to the NCAA tournament. They did get, I believe, 20 or 21 wins, but they were first round exits. We didn't really see a lot of, of the Iowa State that we saw in weeks and even months prior to that. Now enter this season. Iowa State got that 2 seed. They beat San Diego State. They beat another. I'm blanking right now. I know they beat one more team, and then they had to go play Illinois in the Sweet 16, where they did lose by 3 points, I believe. Now, Iowa State last year garnered attention for how they were defending their opponents. They were playing man to man defense, which is where players will just stick with their assigned player for most of the play and not let up and not try to defend other areas of the court. They were sticking to mostly man to man throughout the whole conference time and season and play. They did occasionally play some zone if teams were known for their zone coverage and their zone style of play. Iowa State could adapt to that. They could adapt to that, but that's not to say that they didn't really adapt well. You did Teams could pick out Iowa State's flaws in the way that they were defending, but they were still good defenders. Now enter this year. TJ Otzelberger took that defense to a whole different level. This year, you saw Iowa State sticking to man defense. You saw them playing zone defense. You saw them in 2-3 zone. You saw them almost everywhere. But not only were they playing good and pretty efficient defense, they were getting physical. They were going at the ball. They were not letting up. They were pretty much daring their opponents to take shots and shoot that ball. I think a big improvement from last season to this season was that every player worked and improved on their defense, and that a lot of that credit should go to TJ Otzelberger for drilling into his players' heads that defense can and will win you games. When you don't have a great offensive night, if those shots aren't falling down, if things just maybe aren't going the way that you expect them to, offense is just 50% of the reason why teams win at times and 50% of the reason why teams lose. That other 50% goes to the defense. If you're playing great defense, if you are playing the defense that your coach has assigned you to play, if you are sticking with your players, if you are not giving up easy shots and those shots aren't falling down for those opponents, you're getting a second opportunity to go to your end of the court and make a play and score some baskets. Iowa State's defense went up to number 1 in the KenPom standings after their 29-point win over Houston in the Big 12 tournament, the Big 12 championship. Iowa State's defense was and still remains the biggest factor why they were able to come out with wins, very close wins in Hilton and very close wins onto the road. They were not the most, effective, and they were not the most outstanding offensive team in the Big 12. That title, I think, can go to Houston and a few other teams. But defensively, they were one of the best defensive teams in the Big 12 and in the nation. They were forcing their opponents to turn the ball over more than 14 times a game. They were coming out with 14 turnovers that the other team committed. And when you force a team to commit a turnover, that leads to easy points if you can find a way to handle the ball, control the ball, and go into the basket or make a play or make anything happen. So let's talk about the NCAA tournament. Iowa State's first 2 games in the round of 64 and the round of 32 were a bit iffy. I think the first game for them was another test of playing on a neutral court. Hilt the Big 12 tournament for a quick moment. The Big 12 tournament takes place in Kansas City at the Phillips 66. It's called the Phillips 66 Big 12 tournament. I struggled with words there for a second. But the stadium is the Sprint Center, and people in the media, Cyclone fans, Big 12 fans often refer to the Sprint Center as Hilton South. It's not a very far drive from Ames to Kansas City, but it's also not much of a far drive either from Kansas State's home matter, which is Manhattan, Kansas. The Kansas Jayhawks are I I was going to say I know which part of Kansas that the Kansas Jayhawks are in, but I don't know that. So that is a lie. Don't quote me on that. But I do believe the Kansas Jayhawks have a bit more of a travel than Manhattan is. And now that's really going to bother me that I don't know where the Kansas Jayhawks are located in. I know they are located in Kansas, but yeah, I'm going to have to do research on there. Anyways, the Sprint Center is often dubbed Hilton South due to the fact that it's not much of a far drive from Ames to there. It's also not much of a far drive from Manhattan to there either. But it's just always been kind of known as Hilton South. And Hilton South was real, it was present, and it was very clear who those fans showed up for. But enter the NCAA tournament. Iowa State had to go on to a neutral court, and they were playing on the road again. Their last true road game came at Kansas State in their regular season finale, where it was just I wouldn't say it was much of a wreck or a mess, but they just again looked a little bit inconsistent. Iowa State stuck to what they were doing well all season, which was defending the ball, forcing their opponents to turn the ball over, coming up with those baskets. But offensively, they were struggling to get into a rhythm. They were coming out to start the game slow. And one of my biggest concerns with the team that I saw is that if they get off to a slow start right away, it's hard to build up that momentum and to keep up. Iowa State has to be able to score quickly and score efficiently. They can't be missing, their first 5 shots in a row, especially if their opponents are making their first 5 shots. And then you find yourself at a double digit deficit right away. Iowa State's win in the round of 64, it was a good win. There was a little bit of, I wouldn't say errors. There was a little bit of stuff that I think that they could have done better at, but a win is a win. And in the round of 32, we kind of saw that same thing where they got off to a good start, and then their shots weren't falling down after that, and they kind of had to play a little bit of catch up and stuff. But they still, again, came out with a win. Moving on to the Sweet 16. Illinois was definitely a team that people should have been keeping their eyes out for as potentially making a big run throughout the whole entire tournament. Illinois had players who could do a bunch of stuff on offense and the defense, and they were known for, again, just kind of like Iowa State, their defense and their unique style of play. And against Illinois, that fear, that same concern was a reality where Iowa State got off to a cold start. Their shots just weren't falling down, and Illinois was finding all the ways to make their shots, make their baskets, draw fouls, and just was the more dominant team during that first half of the game. Another kind of weakness for Iowa State is their ability to get to foul early and get yourself into foul trouble. And that comes with just being a really physical and defensive team. If you are sticking and playing man to man and you're right in front of your guy and defending them, one small, bump or one small, encounter with a player could result into a foul. There was a few ticky-tacky fouls in the first half of the Sweet 16 against Iowa State and Illinois. I don't think there's much denying that. I think some players got called for fouls that they shouldn't have been called for, but there was also fouls that were justifiable and were blankly obvious. The second half of the Sweet 16, Iowa State seemed to awaken. I think the halftime was needed for them. They could retalk their strategy, they could retalk their game plan, and they came out as what I had hoped to see them come out into the first half. But they did lose to Illinois, and thus their season came to an end into the Sweet 16. But let's get to the main question here. Can we call this season for Iowa State men a failure? I know I talked about how they had the potential to be a Final Four team and them being the worst two seed and being in the same region as UConn doesn't really change that. I think after the first game for them in the tournament, I had the inkling suspicion that they were not going to go as far to the Final Four as I kind of had predicted and what most people probably predicted. But this season was not a failure. This season was one of Iowa State's better seasons in recent memory and recent history. They were a lot better this year than they were last year and 2 years prior and the year before that, where they did not win a single conference game. This season showed that Iowa State was willing to come out, they were willing to improve and make the changes from last season into this season. You saw that players were willing to put in that hard work into the off season to better themselves. TJ took his team's dynamic and took a different approach this year, and it shined. There was a reason why Iowa State was ranked the number 6 team in the country by the end of the regular season, and their season was far more successful than a few other teams in the Big 12, and they finished second place in the Big 12 by the end of the regular season finale. They finished second when they were projected to finish 7th or 8th. I can't remember which one, but I do know it was either 7th or 8th. They exceeded a lot of people's expectations. When the bar was here, they took that bar and put it up to there. You saw, and you could just tell that those men on the court were playing not just for their team, for themselves, for their fans, but they were playing for their community. They were playing as a unit. It wasn't just a one-man show. It was a five-man show for all 5 players on that court. And TJ absolutely deserves his flowers for how this season panned out and played out. Now, the real question is, are we going to see this team improve from this year into next year? That still remains to be seen and waits and still has yet to be, kind of answered and discovered. Again, their season did just come to an end a few weeks ago, and only time will tell us that. There are quite a handful of basketball players who were on the roster this year who decided to enter their names into the transfer portal for next season. They are losing Robert Jones, Trey King, and Hassan Ward. All 3 of them are seniors, and all 3 of them are graduating. they don't have their year of eligibility remaining. I think all of them did use up their COVID years. But Curtis Jones, who was a senior on the team this year, has announced that he will be coming back next season as a fifth year senior. So that's something to be excited about. I don't see any scenario where Taman, Keyshawn, or Milan decides to transfer. I think they'll all stick with the program again for another year. And I do know that Iowa State's bringing in some great freshmen into next season, and they they should likely get at least one or two more transfer players who are in the transfer portal committing to Iowa State. I know that there are two players already who are transfers who are coming to play next season. And with that, there it is. Our regular season, or just the recap of the Iowa State men's basketball season. I had fun talking about this, and that's a really long video. I'm just looking at that. I've been talking for 46 minutes. I was hoping to make this at least a 20-minute video, but we have doubled that time. But again, this season for Iowa State was not a failure. They exceeded people's expectations of them, and I'm really excited to see how this team grows and continues to improve from here on out. And with that, that is the end of this video. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys probably next year when we can talk about Iowa State basketball again. Thanks, guys.